You know that classic Hollywood image of controlling the sky?
Oh, like the whole Top Gun fantasies.
Exactly. The fighter pilot strapped into the cockpit, breathing heavy through the oxygen mask, pulling high Gs in a Mach 2 dogfight. It's iconic. It's thrilling. And while based on the massive stack of research sitting in front of us today, that entire concept of air superiority, it's completely 100% dead.
It really is. I mean, it's just a relic of the past at this point. That entire paradigm of what it means to actually dominate airspace has been quietly but totally dismantled over the last few years.
And exploring how that happened is the exact mission of today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We are unpacking a huge stack of sources, internal defense memos, global arms trade data, and some incredibly dense supply chain reports.
Very dense.
Yeah, really dense. But we're using them to understand this massive collision of three distinct drone economies. We're going to look at how nations are just fighting tooth and nail for dominance and why the real war for the sky is actually happening right now in factories, in battery plants and along shipping routes, not just up in the clouds.
Right. And to really dive into that shift, we have to look objectively at some of the most fiercely contested spaces on the planet.
Yeah, and just to be clear up front for you listening, our sources today cover some incredibly politically charged global conflicts. We're talking about the battlefields of Ukraine and Russia, the Middle East, and the ongoing strategic competition between the U.S. and China.
Exactly.
So our goal today isn't to pick political sides or endorse any national stance. We are just here to impartially report the data, the facts, and the supply chain mechanics exactly as they are laid out in the source material.
Because what that data shows is, honestly, a fundamental rewrite of military doctrine. I mean, for decades, air dominance was defined by whoever had the single most advanced, astronomically expensive stealth aircraft.
Right.
But according to the research, control of the sky is now defined by 6 hidden choke points. It's about manufacturing scale, the sheer ability to build thousands of units a month.
Yeah.
It's about supply chain leverage for basic raw components, plus things like navigation resilience, counter-drone tech, export policies, and finally, market access.
And if you're listening to this, maybe sitting in traffic or walking your dog right now and wondering why you should care about military supply chain choke points, it's because the exact same global production lines that build the smartphone in your pocket or the delivery drones buzzing over your city, those are now the critical leverage points deciding global security.
It's wild. The civilian tech sector and the military-industrial complex have completely collided.
They really have.
So to understand the mechanics of that collision, we first need to establish what is actually flying up there right now.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So the sources outline that the modern sky is divided into 3 overlapping tiers, or economies. The first is what we might traditionally expect high-end military UAVs. The U.S. and Israel are the traditional benchmarks here. We're talking about multi-million-dollar systems like the MQ-9 Reaper or the RQ-4 Global Hawk.
Those are the massive ones,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Massive machines. They require extensive satellite infrastructure, huge ground crews, and they basically behave like traditional manned aircraft.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to make sure we visualize this right. If we compare this to the automotive world, the first economy, those MQ-9 Reapers, they're the Formula One cars.
That's a great way to put it.
They're incredibly expensive, heavily regulated. They need a massive pit crew just to turn the engine on, and only a select few get to actually own them.
That is a highly accurate comparison. But then we have the second economy, commercial and dual-use drones. And this lane is absolutely dominated by China.
Oh, wow. How dominated are we talking?
Well, we're looking at a market report from Berg Insight, and it estimates that a single Chinese company, DJI, holds a staggering 70% of the commercial drone market.
70%.
Just one company. Just one company. And that's specifically excluding cheap recreational toys or purely military grades. The report notes that as of 2024, there was an installed base of 2.8 million of these commercial units actively being used globally, for industrial, agricultural, and government applications.
2.8 million units. Okay, so keeping with our analogy, those commercial drones are the Toyota Corollas.
Exactly.
They're everywhere, they are super reliable, you can buy replacement parts for them anywhere, and millions of people drive them every day without needing special security clearance.
Which leads us directly into the third economy, the attritable or disposable tier.
The disposable ones.
Right. This is the wartime mass production model. The most striking example in our sources is Ukraine, which has essentially industrialized the procurement of cheap, first-person view, or FPV, drones.
I've seen videos of those.
Yeah, and the scale is insane. They reportedly plan to produce around 4.5 million FPV drones in 2025 alone.
4.5 million in 1 year.
In 1 year. Their entire strategic value comes from scale, rapid iteration speed, and frankly, treating the drone as disposable ammunition rather than an aircraft that you expect to come back.
So that third economy is like taking a cheap remote control car you built in your garage from mail-order parts, strapping explosives to the hood, and driving it into a wall on purpose.
Oh, instant time's over, yeah.
But, okay, I have to push back here.
Sure.
Surely, in a head-to-head match, a $30 million Formula One car, like a Reaper drone with state-of-the-art radar and sensors that always beats the cheap disposable RC car, right? So why are the Corollas and the disposable garage builds suddenly taking over the whole strategic narrative?
Well, that is the logical assumption, assuming a vacuum.
Yeah.
But it completely ignores the reality of global export policy.
Policy.
Yeah, policy. Much more than raw technological capability, policy actually reshaped this entire market. For a long time, the U.S. heavily restricted the export of its high-end drones. They fell under a framework called the Missile Technology Control Regime, or MTCR.
Oh, right. I remember looking at the MTCR previously and thinking it was wild that regulators categorized a surveillance drone the exact same way they categorize, like, a Tomahawk cruise missile.
It sounds crazy now, but the underlying logic at the time was about non-proliferation. Regulators looked at an unmanned vehicle that could carry a payload over a long distance autonomously, and they just legally boxed it in with cruise missiles.
Wow.
And because of that rigid categorization, the U.S. government applied extreme restraint. Yet allied states in the Middle East, countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, who wanted to buy American armed drones to secure their borders, but they simply weren't legally allowed to.
So the U.S. effectively just locked the doors to the showroom.
Exactly.
But warfare and national security needs don't just pause because of export laws. I mean, if a nation has billions of dollars to spend and an urgent security need, they are going to find a vendor.
Nature abhors a vacuum, right? And the global arms trade is no different. So those buyers turned to the available and exportable lane. They went to China.
Oh.
They started buying models like the CH-4, which perfectly filled that gap. And China's advantage wasn't that their drones had superior stealth or better sensors.
No.
No, it was that they were good enough, highly affordable, and came with very few political strings or end-use monitoring attached.
And that desperation for accessible hardware perfectly paved the way for nations like Turkey to step in, right? And just absolutely dominate the mid-tier market.
Oh, absolutely. Turkey is the ultimate case study in reading the market here. They saw this massive gap between the multi-million-dollar restricted systems and the basic commercial systems, and they capitalized on it.
Which system specifically?
The prime example in the sources is the Baykar TB2. It's a medium-altitude, long-endurance drone. It wasn't designed to evade advanced radar. It was just designed to be effective and relatively cheap. And it became incredibly famous during the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh conflict.
Right, because it completely decimated traditional armored columns. The TB2s used these laser-guided micromunitions against older Soviet-era air defense systems that simply weren't designed to track small, slow-moving objects.
Exactly.
It essentially proved you didn't need a stealth bomber to destroy a multi-million-dollar tank.
The tactical shift was undeniable, and the numbers reflect that. Baykar now has export contracts with 36 countries. And we are not just talking about minor buyers here.
Really?
Yet NATO states like Poland and Romania are actively buying Turkish drones. They realized they didn't need to spend 2 decades and billions of dollars building a domestic drone program from scratch when they could just buy a combat-proven Turkish system right off the shelf.
It seems like the U.S. finally realized they were bleeding market share, too, because the sources note a major shift in late 2025.
They did.
The State Department finally updated its policy, officially stepping away from that default missile categorization and reviewing drone export requests more like manned fighter aircraft. And we immediately saw India sign a deal for 31 MQ-9B drones, and Qatar got initial approval for a massive $2 billion purchase.
Right, but they basically attempted to close the barn door after the horse had already bolted.
Too little, too late.
Kind of. The geopolitical market fragmentation was already done. By the time that policy shifted, the sky was already permanently flooded with millions of different tiers of technology.
Which creates an absolute mathematical nightmare for traditional air defense.
Oh, a total nightmare.
Because now that the airspace is swarming with millions of these Toyota Corollas and disposable garage-built drones, the old way of defending the sky is financially ruinous. I mean, you simply cannot fire a $2 million Patriot missile at a $500 piece of plastic and lithium.
No, the cost-exchange ratio will bankrupt a military in a week.
Exactly. So how do you actually defend against this volume?
Well, you're touching on what the sources call the new defensive industrial boom. Counter-UAS, or counter-drone technology, is the new gold rush.
Okay.
And the consensus across the defense sector is that a single magic bullet just doesn't exist. Defense has to be meticulously layered.
Layered how?
First is detection, using a combination of radar, acoustic sensors to actually hear the rotors, and infrared to see the motor heat, because you have to find it before you can kill it.
Makes sense.
Second is electronic defeat, which primarily involves jamming.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because when we talk about jamming, we're mostly talking about severing the radio link between the pilot and the drone, or spoofing the GPS.
Exactly.
And for anyone listening who doesn't know how spoofing works, satellite GPS signals are actually incredibly weak by the time they reach the surface of the Earth from orbit.
Very weak.
So a localized jammer just blasts a much louder fake satellite signal at the drone, tricking its receiver into thinking it's miles away from its actual target, or, telling it that it's suddenly 1,000 feet underground, so it just crashes.
That is the exact mechanism. You overwhelm the truth with localized noise.
Right.
But if electronic defeat fails, the third layer is kinetic defeat, shooting it down with traditional anti-aircraft guns, fragmentation rounds, or even interceptor drones. And then the fourth layer is directed energy.
Lasers. I know defense contractors have been bringing directed energy prototypes to trade shows for years, showing off these shiny sci-fi turrets in the desert.
Yeah, they have.
But what really caught my eye in the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation report was that the U.S. Army actually deployed 4 real DMS RAD systems in early 2024. Are we finally past the prototype phase here? Like, are we talking about a 50-kilowatt laser physically melting a lithium-ion battery midair until it combusts?
We actually are. The DMS ARAD is a 50-kilowatt laser mounted directly onto a Stryker armored vehicle.
That's incredible.
Its specific mission is to burn those Group 1 to 3 drones, so the smaller, commercial-sized threats, right out of the sky. It works precisely by superheating the plastic chassis or the battery until structural failure occurs.
Wow.
And the reason this is so revolutionary is the cost per shot metric. Instead of spending $1 million on an interceptor missile, you're spending a few dollars on the diesel fuel required to generate the electricity for the laser. It flips the attrition math back in favor of the defender.
It's an unlimited magazine as long as you have gas in the tank. And it's not just lasers either. We're seeing drones literally dogfighting other drones. The contractor RTX produces something called the Coyote, which is an expendable interceptor drone with a kinetic warhead. It actively hunts down the enemy drone and crashes into it.
Right.
And the Pentagon has this entire initiative called Replicator 2 that's heavily focused on fielding these low collateral defeat options. Because you need interceptors or lasers, you can't just have heavy anti-aircraft machine gun fire raining back down on the streets of a populated urban area or a crowded military base.
The collateral damage aspect is huge, but the battlefield feedback loop is moving at a terrifying speed. Because as soon as the defensive layer is perfected, the offense adapts.
Which leads to one of the most bizarre technological regressions I found in the source material.
Oh, the fiber optics.
Yes. We talked about how good electronic warfare got at jamming radio frequencies, right? It got so effective at drowning out the control signals that drone manufacturers had to completely rethink physics. They started deploying fiber optic FPV drones.
It's so wild to think about.
Just picture the physical reality of this for a second. A drone flying at 80 miles an hour over a battlefield, literally unspooling a microscopic glass wire behind it for up to 10 kilometers.
Yep.
The video feed and the flight controls are traveling as pulses of light inside that physical wire.
And what's fascinating here is how that one tactical adaptation forces the entire defensive paradigm to reset. Because the connection is hardwired through light, it is utterly 100% immune to radio frequency jamming.
Completely unjammable.
You can blast all the electromagnetic noise you want at it, and the pilot just ignores it.
It's like we invented wireless internet, realized it was too easy for our neighbors to hack, and decided to just run a 10-mile-long Ethernet cable across a war zone instead.
That is essentially what is happening.
Yep.
And by removing the radio frequency vulnerability, the defender has to abandon electronic warfare entirely for that threat. You're forced to revert to physical concealment, basically hiding your assets better, or kinetic defeat, meaning you have to physically shoot down a small, extremely fast-moving object. And this network entanglement goes even deeper. The sources note how deeply military drones have become entangled with commercial satellite internet constellations like Starlink.
Oh man, that's a massive legal and tactical gray area.
It really is.
When combat drones are using commercial civilian satellites to navigate and stream targeting data, the defenders have to figure out how to restrict that service without, committing an act of war against a civilian space company. The line between civilian telecom infrastructure and military command and control has basically just vanished.
And if we follow that logic to its conclusion, it brings us to the ultimate realization of this deep dive.
Okay, lay it on me.
If electronic warfare is being bypassed by fiber optics, and lasers are still scaling up, and the sky is filled with literally millions of autonomous and remote-controlled machines, the ultimate defense against a drone swarm isn't actually shooting it down.
No. The ultimate defense is making sure your enemy cannot physically get the batteries, the wires, or the lenses to build the drone in the first place. The real war is in the supply chain.
Exactly. This is the hidden choke point that decides everything. The Royal United Services Institute, RESI, they published a deep dive into this, and they highlighted a stark systemic vulnerability. Ukraine has done an incredible job scaling its domestic industry, reporting that 96% of their FPV drones are now assembled domestically.
Which, on paper, sounds like a massive success story for local manufacturing and resilience, right?
It is a success in terms of assembly. But RESI's supply chain research stresses that both Ukraine and the broader West remain deeply structurally dependent on Chinese origin components to build the internal organs of those drones.
The internal organs.
Yeah, we were talking about the critical building blocks, the brushless DC motors, the electronic speed controllers, the mature semiconductors, and the thermal sensors.
It's like proudly bragging to the world that you run the most independent, high-volume bakery in the city, while entirely ignoring the fact that your biggest global rival legally owns the only flour mill in town.
That's a great analogy.
Right. If they stop selling you flour, your ovens go cold.
That is the exact vulnerability playing out on a geopolitical scale right now. Supply chains are no longer just business logistics. They are literal, active weapons.
So what does this all actually mean for national security? I mean, can a nation truly claim to control the sky if they don't even control the neodymium magnets inside the motors of the drones they rely on?
The short answer is absolutely not.
Yeah.
And we saw this weaponization clearly in late 2024. China deliberately restricted the export of critical drone batteries to a major U.S. firm, Skydio.
Oh, wow.
Around the same time, they placed strict limits on the export of permanent magnets and critical metalloids like germanium.
Germanium, that is the core metalloid used in long-wave infrared optics and thermal imaging lenses, right?
Yes, exactly.
So by aggressively squeezing the supply of that one raw element, China is essentially blinding an adversary's drone fleet at night. They don't have to shoot your drone down if they can legally prevent you from manufacturing the lens for the camera in the first place.
You hit the nail on the head. By restricting access to these basic materials, a state can instantly dictate the manufacturing scale and the technological capability of its rivals.
This raises an important question, though. If these commercial components are so critical to survival, how are Western governments reacting? Because they clearly can't just let the open, globalized market dictate who wins a localized conflict.
They aren't leaving it to the free market anymore. We're seeing very aggressive regulatory gatekeeping. In late 2025, the U.S. Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, updated what they call their covered list.
Okay.
They officially added certain foreign-made unmanned aerial systems and their internal communication components to this restricted list.
But wait, why the FCC? That's a civilian telecom agency, not the Department of Defense.
Because modern drones are flying data nodes. They transmit vast amounts of telemetry, visual data, and network topography. The FCC action is proof that the U.S. government no longer views commercial drones as just harmless consumer electronics.
Right.
They are treating foreign commercial drone ecosystems as a critical national security threat, both for espionage and for supply chain fragility. They're essentially attempting to build a legal regulatory wall around the supply chain.
Because if a foreign adversary controls the drone ecosystem that, inspects your highway bridges, monitors your public safety networks, and surveys your industrial power grids, they essentially control your rear area logistics.
Exactly.
In the event of a high-intensity conflict, they could cripple your infrastructure without firing a single missile.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the most profound takeaway from all of this data is that the wall between war and everyday life has been permanently torn down. The drone wars are blurring the lines between specialized military technology and the commercial gear used for civilian infrastructure. I mean, the electric motors in a weaponized FPV drone carrying explosives, and the electric motors in a commercial drone delivering medical supplies to a hospital, they're the exact same motors, built in the exact same factories.
It's the scale of this paradigm shift is genuinely staggering. We started this deep dive by talking about control of the sky being defined by a solitary fighter pilot in a multi-million-dollar jet.
Right?
But the reality in our sources shows a sky that is totally fragmented. The US still holds the high ground with incredibly advanced, expensive systems. China overwhelmingly dominates the raw industrial base and the physical components that make everything fly. And nations like Turkey are dominating the middle ground, moving incredibly fast and selling combat-proven systems globally.
It's a completely new world.
Air dominance is no longer about stealth bombers. It is about machines, supply chain dominance, and the economic ability to scale your defenses faster than your enemy can scale their offenses.
It is an industrial war of attrition, played out in the supply chain before a single unit even takes flight.
Absolutely. And as we look to the future, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to mull over. We talked briefly about the Pentagon's Replicator initiative. They are explicitly pushing to field thousands of autonomous systems across multiple domains, weapons like the Switchblade 600 loitering munition.
Yep.
We are rapidly entering an era where the iteration speed of artificial intelligence algorithms, rather than the physical reflexes of human pilots, will decide air superiority. We are moving away from remote control and towards swarm-scale autonomous operations.
Which is a huge leap.
It is. So when that classic Hollywood image of the pilot is totally gone and the sky is filled with thousands of autonomous machines making lethal decisions against thousands of other autonomous machines, who is actually in control?
A chilling but absolutely necessary question for the next decade.
It really is. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive, for bringing your curiosity, and for giving us your time. Keep questioning the supply chains around you. Keep questioning what you read, and we'll catch you on the next one.